let's get started. Welcome everybody to our latest webinar. I am Ilan Berman. I'm the Senior Vice President of the American Foreign Policy Council here in Washington, D.C. We host these periodic, although planning to be more regular, webinars looking at the common fight against Islamic extremism, delving into topics that are either of interest or underserved. In this particular case, this is a topic that is not underserved. Iran is very much in the headlines today, but I wanted to wait to host a webinar until I had two truly exceptional speakers who had something unique and valuable to say about Iran and its role in the Muslim world, in the ideological contest that's taking place between Muslim nations. A few housekeeping points of order. This webinar is being live streamed on Facebook currently, and it's being recorded. We will, after this webinar, we will post it on the American Foreign Policy Council's YouTube page. We will link to it on our website, www.afpc.org. You'll be able to access it there. If you have any further questions, you can, or comments, or interested in our work, you can follow us at afpc.org. You can subscribe to our in-house bulletins. We cover a wide waterfront of issues, including democracy and reform and radicalism in Iran, as well as in Russia and China, looking at defense technology, at space. And so there's quite a lot for all of you to delve into if you're interested in our work. And of course, there is an ability for you to reach out and connect with us directly, either on social media, via Twitter, via Facebook, or directly via email through contacts on the American Foreign Policy Council's website. The other housekeeping note is that this webinar is very much intended as a supplement to our annual conference series. The American Foreign Policy Council is pleased to put on an annual conference dealing with the wars of ideas that are taking place in the Muslim world and the common responses that are being marshaled by countries that are proponents of moderate Islam, countries that are considered allies and strategic partners of the United States. It is a very variegated picture. Everybody has a different response, but they're all trying to answer a common question. And a central part of that question is a country that is one of the principal drivers of Islamic extremism today, which is the Islamic Republic of Iran. So I'm delighted to be able to host this. I'm delighted to be able to bring on the two of my friends, two of the foremost experts that I know, looking at Iranian politics, Iranian society, and also at the mechanics of the key strategic driver within Iran, which is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. So I'll introduce them briefly, and then I'll kick this off. This is intended as more of a conversation to try to elicit some unique viewpoints. If you have questions, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom, and we will curate the questions and we will get to them at the end of the webinar. And we're planning to run for 1 hour. So without further ado, let me introduce to all of you, first off, Dr. Saeid Golkar, who is the UC Foundation Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. He's also a senior advisor at United Against Nuclear Iran, which is an advocacy group here in Washington and in New York. He previously served as a senior fellow at the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, and he received his PhD in political science from Tehran University in 2008. Our other speaker is Kasra Aarabi. Kasra is the director of IRGC research at United Against Nuclear Iran. He specializes in Iranian military and security affairs and Shia extremism. And he's also a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute here in Washington, D.C. So there's much more. Both are accomplished scholars. I'll leave it up to you to research them and to read their latest writings. They're definitely worth delving into. But Saeid, let me start with you because I do want this to be a sort of a conversation about Iran and contemporary dynamics. So to me, one of the most remarkable and underreported things that's happening in Iran today is that you're seeing a pretty dramatic decline in religiosity. because something like 75% of the country's 2,500 mosques have been closed because of a lack of attendance. You have Iranian officials who are speaking publicly about how there is a crisis of faith within the regime. So explain this. What's happening here? And I mean, honestly, right? This is a regime that's built around expansionist revolutionary ideology. So what does it mean as a practical matter?
Thank you, Ilan, for inviting us. It's an honor to be with you. You know, to answer your question, I think I have to start the story from 1970, 1979, the Iranian or Islamic revolution in Iran. In 1979, a group of the Islamists came to the power, promised that we are going to create an Islamic heaven for the Iranian people, based on the ideology that we know it as a Khomeinism. Khomeinism is a subtype of Islamist, Shia political Islamism. The Khomeinism has a lot of similarities with other Islamist ideologies in terms of being anti-Semitic / anti-Zionist, anti-Americanism, creation of the pious societies, emphasizing of the idea of the jihad and martyrdom, and more importantly, believing that Islam will dominate the world. That's the characteristic. You can see it in almost all of the Islamist branches. They came to the power, and from 1979, they tried to achieve these goals domestically, creating Islamic societies, and regionally and internationally exporting this idea and hopefully dominating the world by their own ideology. They call it the export of the revolution. After 43 years, in terms of the domestic politics, enforcing Islam, Islamizing the society from the above, from the state, and from the society, from the grassroots, they created one of the most, secular societies among of the Muslim majority countries, 51 Muslim majority countries. If you see, Iranian society is one of the most secular one. Why it happened? It's exactly because of the Islamic Republic failure in delivering what they promised. They promised to create a heaven, and they created the hell. They created societies that not only the economically living there is very, very difficult, environmentally, Iranian has a lot of problem. Politically, it's one of the most repressive political system. Socially, unlike many of these new authoritarian regime that they leave people in the social domain, and they don't get involved in the social relationship. The Islamic Republic is some kind of the proto-totalitarian system that even in the social, in private life, Iranian doesn't have too much freedom. As a result, you come up with the societies who gradually becoming not only secular, they becoming anti-Islamic. The resentment toward Islam and Islamic growth is very, very widespread in Iran. When we talk about the secularization in social science, we usually refer to the three phenomena. We refer to the decline of religiosity that you talk about it. There are a lot of statistics that show Iranian, most of the youth don't pray, don't fast, don't, doing the basic, the activities in Islam. Another definition of secularization is a belief to the separation of the church and the state. According to the state statistic, more than 75% of the Iranian wants to have a country or a regime that a state and religion are completely separated. And the last one is a personalization of the religion. People still describe themselves as religious, but they don't believe to the religious authorities, to the clergies. In all of these aspects, you will see Iranian societies who are becoming much more, secular, and in some cases even anti-Islamic.
Right, and you said I think a couple of really profound things about how society is shifting, and just a statistic to throw out to reinforce your point. The back of the envelope calculation is that the average Iranian is today 1/3 poorer on a personal basis than his counterparts in January of 1979, before the revolution. And you know, that speaks to that failure to thrive that you talked about. And it also helps to animate that statistic, because maybe the viewers, the watchers missed it, but you said something very profound, which is that the regime, by the regime's own statistics, something like 75% of Iranians think that the regime is bankrupt. They want a sort of a more secular, they want to transition beyond the theocratic regime. The way in authoritarian societies, the way this poll works, the true numbers are assuredly higher. So this really bespeaks a profound crisis of confidence. So Kasra, over to you. Let me ask about the key strategic actor, and I sort of framed it at the beginning, but to me, the sort of the alpha and the omega when you're talking about Iran in the strategic sense is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And that name by itself, by the way, is significant, right? The guards are there to guard the revolution. They're not there to guard Iran. They're there to guard the revolution and the sanctity of the revolutionary project. But the IRGC has become a key way in which Tehran projects power globally. And so I think it's useful to sort of to outline the key features of the IRGC. Why is it so important in this system, and what do they actually do as a practical matter?
Absolutely, and thank you for the kind invitation. So it's important to take a step back and look at the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And as you said, it's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Iran is not even in its name, and that's something that IRGC commanders repeatedly say. But unfortunately, there are those in the West that still view the IRGC as some form of Persian nationalist force, or having a Persian nationalist project. In fact, the IRGC despises that. It has sought to eradicate Persian identity, Iranian identity. If you look at the IRGC, first and foremost, it started off as a militia, a series of militia. And although it has professionalized over time, really today, I think it's most accurately described as an institutionalized militia and a state within a state. Now, when we talk about the Revolutionary Guard from at least Ayatollah Khamenei's perspective, he views the IRGC as the Sutun Khayme Inqilab, which means the main pillar of the Islamic Revolution. The IRGC, from the very beginning, acting effectively as the bodyguards of the clergy domestically to consolidate power, and externally having an ideological mission of jihad in God's path to spread Sharia across the globe. And that is still in the Islamic Republic of Iran's constitution today. So the IRGC itself, it's really important to understand that when we see the guardsmen, not everyone, no Tom, Dick, or Harry can just enter into the IRGC. There is a rigorous selection process. They want to ensure that only the most zealous individuals enter the guard to prevent the dilution of the ideology. So the IRGC began, as I said, as a militia, and it's maintained that militia identity through the way it behaves. So if we dig deep, we actually see, and as you have pointed out to this, Ilan, and Saeid has as well, effectively, this is a violent Islamist extremist organization, no different to the likes of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah. Obviously, ISIS, Al-Qaeda have a Sunni Islamist interpretation, have a Sunni interpretation of Islam, and the Revolutionary Guard is Shia. But where they differ is on the form of the Islamic State. Whereas Sunni, according to Sunni tradition, ISIS, Al-Qaeda want a caliphate. On the Shia side, on the Shia Islamists, the IRGC, Hezbollah, they want an imamate based on the Imam and the Ummah, according to Shia custom. But when we say they are the same, what do we mean? Let's unpack that and let's be methodical about that. Well, like these Islamist extremist organizations, the IRGC places deep emphasis on ideological indoctrination, radicalization, and that has increased significantly throughout the years. Something that started as under 20% before 1997, increasing to 20% of training after 2002, increasing to 30% of training in the IRGC in 2007, 2008. And after the Green Movement protest, Khamenei increased that to 50%. So 50% of training in the IRGC is indoctrination, is radicalization. the next question is, okay, well, what are they teaching their recruits? Because if we really want to get into the mindset, we have to understand their internal indoctrination program, not their external propaganda, because their external propaganda is designed for different audiences, different external audiences. You can only understand the true ideology by digging deep and understanding what they're teaching their recruits. So based on the internal training manuals of the IRGC, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, like Hezbollah, the IRGC is teaching its members to wage armed jihad against Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians on the basis that they, quote, have unacceptable faith and must either convert to Islam or be killed. Likewise, for Iranians who oppose the regime, they call on, the textbooks teach IRGC members that these individuals are muharibs, they are waging war against God. The element of nationality is irrelevant because you're either an insider, a follower, or an outsider, a khodi or a ghayr khodi. So for Iranians who are deemed as opposing the Islamic Republic and take action, protest, these are muharibs. These individuals, according to the IRGC, must be tortured prior to their execution. So the indoctrination program is an Islamist extremist indoctrination program. Let's look at the modus operandi of the IRGC as well to see whether they are putting these words into action. Well, actually, externally, what's their modus operandi? Terrorism, hostage-taking, militancy. They don't function like a normal conventional armed force. They operate as an ideological organization, and that ideology is a violent Islamist extremist ideology. Now, that gives you a very brief overview as to what the IRGC is. Over time, Khamenei, because of the lack of legitimacy internally, has had to rely more and more on the IRGC's authority, on their power, on their physical power to sustain the Islamic Republic. And over the period of time, we have seen the IRGC branch out from its military, professionalizing in the military field, then taking over the economy, then taking over the political sphere, intelligence, and as well as that culture. So the IRGC is de facto operating as a state within a state, but crucial to understand, when we're talking about the IRGC, obviously we're talking about a huge entity, 180,000 people, individuals at least. But when we are talking about the inner core, we mean that senior command elite of the IRGC. The elite of the IRGC should be viewed no differently to clerics. They are effectively clerics in military uniform. They are clerics in IRGC uniform. So the idea that they would one day launch a coup against Khamenei or the clerical regime, I personally think that is far-fetched. It's based off, I think, wishful thinking by some in the West, but really a failure to understand and properly grasp what the IRGC is. Its DNA is one with the clergy.
No, that's great. And I want to dig into the sort of the future scenarios, really, because as we get further into this conversation, because I think that's a crucial one to sort of to unpack and explain what's possible. But you teed up a question that I had for Saeid, I think very nicely, because earlier this month, we saw the death of Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi and other top officials, including the Iranian foreign minister, in a helicopter crash. And this was a hugely significant event for all sorts of reasons. But for domestic political reasons, I think probably the most profound impact is that it throws into entire disarray the question of succession within the Iranian regime, succession for the post of Iran's supreme leader. And this is something that has been a topic of fevered conversation and debate here in the West. But Ibrahim Raisi, in recent months, at least since his election as president, was sort of seen by some, the conventional wisdom was that he was shortlisted, at least. He was sort of at the top of the list. That's obviously not in the cards anymore. And so explain this process to us. Explain why this is a crisis and what happens next.
Thank you, Ilan. Actually, Ibrahim Raisi was my horse in the succession, race that unfortunately lost it. But since 2017-18, I have argued that the Raisi, in my humble opinion, is one of the most important candidates for the job. Ayatollah Khamenei gradually took his hand, brought him from being a prosecutor to be the head of the Astana Quds, and then the judiciary, and then the presidency. For one reason, he wants to see if the Raisi can succeed him. And he picked him for many, many reasons. Most importantly, the same political ideology that Ayatollah Khamenei has. Ayatollah Khamenei is part of the clergy, we call it the militant Islamists, who believe to the Islamism, but he wants to achieve that even using force and violence. And Raisi believes to the same idea. He died last week in a helicopter crash. Nobody really knows what happened, but the common sense is this was an accident. And he's out of the picture right now. If you think about the Iranian constitution, after Ayatollah Khamenei passed away or his demise, the Assembly of Experts consisted of 88 clergy are coming and picking the next leader in a closed session. The last Assembly of Experts election was just a few months ago, and almost most of 90% of this Assembly of Experts very easily can be labeled as a hardliner or as Ayatollah Khamenei allies, the people with the same outlook. And they're supposed to pick up the leaders. The inside of the Assembly of Experts, there are different commission and working groups. One of the working group is specifically trying to figure it out who will be the next supreme leader. And based on my idea, Raisi was part of this Assembly of Experts, was the secretary of the Assembly of Experts, was in many of these internal commission. And because he was a president and has a political experiences, he was most likely candidate, and he is not right now. If you look at the scene, according to the constitution, the next supreme leader should be a marja, should be a mujtahid. Should be a mujtahid, meaning should be able to reasoning, based on his reasoning, to find out the new laws, and is able to extract the law based on the text, based on Quran, based on the Hadith, based on consensus. He shouldn't be a marja taqlid like in the Constitution of 1979. So if you look at this people of the ayah being a mujtahid or ayatollah, we have about 1,000 people who inside of Iran and outside of Iran are labeled as ayatollah or as a mujtahid. But there are only a few that can fit the constitutional criteria, have a political experience, more importantly, are picked by the Assembly of Experts. They have to be mujtahid and etc. etc. Among all of these people who has a label of the mujtahid, I think Mujtaba Khamenei right now has much more chance. Why I'm talking about that? Because based on the Islamic Republic propaganda, he's a mujtahid. He has started to teach the Dars Kharij from 2009, sign up being a mujtahid. He has a political experiences from 1994. We have the evidence that the Mujtaba Khamenei has started working in the office as a manager, taking care of the small businesses, and gradually became the most important man on the Ayatollah Khamenei office. And there is nobody else that has both the IRGC support and at the same time Assembly of Experts, support. Assembly of Experts, again, we have to remember there are 88 right now who have been died, 86 hardline clergy who have been protected by the guard, who have been picked by Ayatollah Khamenei because of the same outlook, and they're coming to. So again, this is based on pure speculation, but because of Mujtaba Khamenei influences on Ayatollah Khamenei office, because his connection with the IRGC, because his connection with the state bureaucracy, because his connection with the seminary school, it seems that there is no other candidate who are able to to compete with the Mujtaba. The only problem with the Mujtaba to become the next supreme leader, based on the Iranian Observer, is the culture of the seminarian and the culture of the clergy. Usually the son don't succeed the father in a seminarian sense, but we shouldn't forget that this is not a religious succession. This is a political succession. So it is possible for Ayatollah Khamenei to do it. I think it's very easy for Ayatollah Khamenei to do it because Assembly of Experts, all of them have handpicked. And he has all of this support of the state bureaucracy, of the seminarian school, and more importantly, of the IRGC.
No, and I think that's the crucial point. This is not a religious succession. This is a political succession. And the regime is going to prioritize stability. So that sort of gets me back, Kasra, to something that you mentioned. Because on the question of Iranian succession, there's obviously a scenario, and it's admittedly, I think, one that's very attractive here in the West, that sees the IRGC becoming the predominant power in the country in the future. In fact, experts have been speculating about this for a long time, and with the caveat that they expect the IRGC to politically change their stripes. By the way, there's a historical analog to this, right? This is the sort of the post-Soviet Russia, the KGB after the collapse of the Soviet Union, in a sense, and so it's worth exploring, I think, a little bit. How likely do you think this is, and if the IRGC does take over, and because it's Iran's clerical army, if it does take over, is it willing to de-ideologize?
I think it's extremely unlikely, highly unlikely. And the reason I say that is because, first of all, those who are discussing and presenting the IRGC as having, for example, Persian nationalist elements, they are, first of all, not looking at the various centers of power in the IRGC. You have an economic center of power, you have a political center of power, you've got a military security center of power, and then you've got this cultural center of power. They are specifically, which handles the propaganda, they are specifically zooming into the cultural pillar of the IRGC and only cherry picking certain elements of propaganda designed specifically for external audiences, doesn't give an accurate reflection of the internal belief system of the IRGC, but they have been specifically tailored to appeal to the masses, and the masses being, well, now the biggest force against the Islamist regime, the biggest force against the IRGC and Khamenei is this concept of Iranian nationalism, people coming together, leaving the Imam and Ummah for the nation and state. And really that's part of, if you see IRGC propaganda kind of pandering to that, it really is only propaganda. And actually, those observers are merely cherry picking, because if you look at the cultural pillar, I think it was in 2015 alone, they produced more than, I want to say, 5,000 productions on the defenders of the holy shrines. And then you also had, 2 or 3 kind of propaganda outputs that kind of glorified Persian nationalism, or propagated that, again designed for those masses. Well, then we need to assess where are when we're talking about the IRGC, we're talking about an entity of 180,000, but when we're talking about a coup or a potential takeover, we're really talking about the elite of the IRGC. So the next question is, well, is the IRGC's values, first of all, opposed to that of the clergy? No, their values are the same. As I said, there are there are clerics in military uniform. As part of their indoctrination, you get seminary studies. These are the constituency from which the IRGC recruits from, is from a deeply Islamist extremist base. As I said, no ordinary Iranian can suddenly decide, I'm going into the IRGC. There are rigorous tests and assessments. Now, internally, Khamenei has also produced a system through indoctrination, through co-optation, and through purging to control the guard, to ensure that his men, his commissars, are embedded within the IRGC. So you have this rigorous process, then you have to ask, okay, well, when we're talking about the elites of the pillars that I just described, cultural, economic, security, military, where do they belong? Well, they're belonging to the security military aspect of the Guard. And those individuals are individuals that have been hand selected by Khamenei. They are part of Khamenei's cult of personality. Let's not forget, as I said, the legitimacy of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps derives from having an imam. The imam, they are the mujahideen for the imam. They are the soldiers, the holy warriors for the imam. This underpins, by the way, their entire domestic base and their entire external project. They are able to recruit young and radicalize young Shia militants because of its Islamic nature, because of the Islamic nature of the regime. As well as that, the promotion system within the IRGC gives priority to ideological commitment over expertise or experience. And that system, a bit like the SS in Nazi Germany, the more extreme, the more ideological you are, the faster you rise. This ensures absolute commitment to Khamenei and the system. That being said, there is no doubt that the IRGC will be a fundamental actor in succession. Whoever comes to succeed Khamenei will need the IRGC's backing. The IRGC will have a hand in picking that individual along with Khamenei in his office, the Beit Rahbari. And there is no doubt that the future leader, the future supreme leader, will have to rely on the IRGC more so than ever before, because anti-regime dissent in Iran has reached unprecedented levels. And the way in which Khamenei has preserved the system is through the IRGC, because the IRGC has the willingness, the resources, and the commitment to continuously spill Iranian blood on the streets. There's no doubt that that future supreme leader will rely on the IRGC more so than ever before. But in the idea that the IRGC, ideologically, they are aligned, again, based on the internal indoctrination material, the IRGC doesn't distinguish between nation states. There is no reference to Iran. They divide the world between the Dar al-Islam, land of Muslims, and Dar al-Kufr, land of infidels. The idea of Iran is irrelevant. They view the world through this ummah, the imam and the ummah. You can be part of the ummah and you can be an Islamist in Lebanon. You can be, if you're an Islamist in Lebanon, loyal to Velayat al-Faqih, the system of the imam, guardianship of the jurist. You could be in Lebanon, you could be in Iraq, you could be in London, you could be in America, and you're part of this system. They're much more concerned about those people than the average Iranian who opposes them. So the idea that they would launch a coup against the clerical regime, I think that's far-fetched. I think it's naively wishful thinking, and it's actually quite concerning because the IRGC is the vehicle through which the clergy has spilt so much blood. Again, these are clerics in military uniform. The IRGC is the entity that the clergy is using to target the West, that is spilling Western blood. So those who are putting their money on the IRGC, I think they're going to be disappointed. The IRGC is, as I said, a violent Islamist extremist organization. Its DNA with the clergy is one, and it will play an important role, but its entire legitimacy for its own very small constituency rests on the clerical regime. It needs the clerical regime to survive. And I think they're very aware of that. Of course, as I said, they will have a key role and their power will increase over time, even more than what it is already.
No, and that's why the succession question is such a crucial one in the context of what happens next. So we're about at the halfway mark, a little bit over. I have a couple of additional questions, and then I'm trying to weave the questions. I'm delighted to see so many people have joined us live. Lots of friends that I can see in terms of the participants. If you will continue to do so, please continue to throw your questions up in the Q&A. I'm trying to weave in as many as I can in the course of our conversation. Let me turn back to Saeid in the and continue the thread of what Kasra talked about, right? The succession question, right? In a very real sense, Iran is a country in motion, right? The population is different. It's changing. Domestic attitudes are changing. Political attitudes are changing. Satisfaction with the regime is declining. And one of the main factors that has given Western observers a great deal of hope that there's going to be substantial political change has been that those attitudes, those changing attitudes. And over the last year and a half, we've seen what came to be known as the Women, Life, Freedom movement really catch fire and shake the country in a fundamental way, right? I had a colleague describe it as sort of, this is the most fundamental ideological challenge to the Iranian regime since its founding in 1979. I don't know if you guys agree, but at any rate, right? However you rack and stack it, this is a hugely significant moment and sort of juncture. And even though those protests have now receded, they're muted. I don't think it's accurate to say that they've are gone away completely, but it's very clear that we have sort of passed, for the regime's purposes, past the moment of danger. The regime is consolidating power. The regime is repressing more effectively, and the protests are muted as a result. But there's still a sense that something qualitatively different is taking place on the ground in Iran, right, after those protests, that some sort of line has been crossed. So talk about that a little bit, right? What's the trajectory here that you see?
Thank you, Ilan. Please let me go back to the Kasra, talk about something, and then related to that, continue to talk about the woman life freedom movement. I completely agree with Kasra that the IRGC is very unlikely to do the coup d'etat against Ayatollah Khamenei or the system for many, many reasons. One of the reasons was the personalization of IRGC, that Ayatollah Khamenei gradually, purged IRGC in several waves. The last one was 2013-14 after the Ahmadinejad. It was the fourth wave of the purification, and created a very personalized military armed force that is they owe everything to himself and his office. So they are not going to do the coup d'etat. Is very unlikely. And that's go back to your question. The woman life freedom, if you look at the trigger of this movement, was a morality policing issue. A girl named Mahsa Amini was killed, and then the people erupt. But that was only the trigger of this movement. There was a lot of structural, long time, causes that led to the people come to the street and protest. And it took about 6 or 7 months for the Islamic Republic to suppress it. Politically, socially, economically, environmentally, culturally, all of this restriction led to massive resentment of the Iranian. As you said, by brutally, the Islamic Republic put it down, killed 700 people, blinded 1,000 people, intentionally, shooting to the eyes, and more than 20,000 people have been put in a jail. And to make sure that still the number of casualties are increasing because the people who are in the jail have been died, or the people who have been sentenced to the death recently. This woman life freedom is just the last round of a different circle of protests started in Iran from 1991. From 1991, after the end of the Iran-Iraq war, after the Ayatollah Khomeini passed away, and gradually people start to revolt. First, very sporadically, a small protest in the rural area, in the suburb of Tehran and a big city like Mashhad. But gradually, a student movement, 1999, 2003. Then you have the Green Movement, 2009, and then 2017, 18, 2019, Aban, that the Islamic Republic killed 1,500, and then Mahsa Amini protests. What we are seeing is a trend that gradually the protests became more frequent. First, it was 10 years, and then 5 years, and then every 2 or 3 years. Second, they became much more violent. The people are coming and are sacrificing their lives. Third, are becoming more radical in terms of the idea and ideology. At the beginning, it was only the reform of the few policies. Then it was a political reform. Where is my vote, for example? But gradually is the whole system should collapse. This is a change that we are seeing. Although the regime was able to use force, brute force, to suppress it, it's not able to solve this structural cause. everything is getting worse and worse in Iran. And part of it, what we call it, the dummification of a state. A state became much more, it became much more difficult for the state to find the problem and solve it. So if you want to have a prediction, although the prediction is very difficult in political science, I think based on the history and based on the characteristic of authoritarian regime or proto-totalitarian regime and a very shaky societies, we can predict that this round of the protests will come back. Maybe next month or maybe next year. But until all of these structural causes have been not answered, you cannot be sure that there will be no protest. So.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think it lends credence to the fact that at least some analysts have talked about Iran being in a pre-revolutionary state, and I think it's been misunderstood the way they intended it. But what you described, those underlying factors, actually create that pre-revolutionary layer. Whether it catches fire next week, next month, next year is a different story. But the ingredients are there. But there's this really interesting schizophrenia that you can see in Iranian policy, because even though they're weak domestically, they're also talking very big internationally, Kasra. And this is exactly what we saw, by the way, in the wake of the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, when Iranian officials were talking big about regional influence. They were really stretching their strategic wings, so to speak. And today you're seeing the same sort of thing. On the same sort of rhetoric on the parts of officials in Tehran, right? So you've obviously had personnel setback in the last couple of weeks, but in the broader sense, it's very clear that the Iranian regime, which because of what Saeid talked about, should really strategically be on the back foot, isn't actually on the back foot. What does this mean as a practical matter for not only for the regime, but also for its extensive network of proxies that you see activated in places like Lebanon and in Iraq and in Yemen? Sure. And what are we likely to see?
I think there's two significant factors. Obviously, there's a myriad of factors, but there are two primary factors here that have been overlooked. One has actually not been overlooked that much, and that's the loss of US deterrence in the Middle East. And really, we have seen that, particularly since the October 7th terrorist attacks, despite the fact that it's very clear that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, even I should say in the months prior to October 7th, in the years prior to October 7th, Saeid and I have been monitoring changes to the IRGC's personnel, doctrine, broader military regime, security infrastructure. And we were writing back then, I think we published it in June and in April, stating that all the signs indicate that these changes to the doctrine, these changes to the personnel, these changes to the broader security military infrastructure of the regime point to at least an appetite or a drive, a preparedness for confrontation with Israel. Since October 7th, we have seen that despite consistent escalation on behalf of the regime in Iran and its network of proxies, more than 170 attacks on US forces in Syria, the Houthis being mobilized, and I think Ismail Ghani, who the IRGC's Quds Force commander was previously regarded as being in Qasem Soleimani's shadow. Actually, I think Ghani has, quote, proven himself to Khamenei. He has mobilized the so-called axis of resistance in a way that we've not really seen before. So part of that calculus has been shaped by a loss in US deterrence. Despite all these escalations, the Biden administration has gone out of its way to make it very clear to Tehran that it doesn't seek direct confrontation or escalation with the Islamic Republic. And what that's led to, it's led to an overinflated sense of confidence externally for the Islamic Republic. It's pumped more air in the already inflated sense of confidence in Tehran. So that's one aspect, the loss of US deterrence. But there is something actually, I think, and Saeid and I have explored this at length for several years now. He referenced it in his speech just now, the dummification of the regime. What do we mean by the dummification of the regime? The Islamic Republic has become more reckless. It has become much more, I would say, aggressive. And it has become much more prone to making strategic errors. Why is that the case? Well, this goes back to Khamenei's project, the second phase of the Islamic Revolution. This manifesto that he launched in 2019 is, according to Mujtaba Khamenei, his son, the single most important document his father has ever produced. This man is effectively a manifesto to prepare the regime for succession and complete his personalization of power project. He has long sought to completely personalize power across the political arm, the military arm, and the bureaucratic arm of the regime. And the second phase, Garmed Engelab, seeks to achieve that. How is that achieved? Well, he's led and waged a, quote, purification process of the regime. And as a result, he has tried to facilitate the rise of a new, absolute, radical, loyal cohort of Khamenei's, his so-called Javuno Hezbollah class, young and ideologically hardline class. This is a new elite that he has sought to facilitate their rise. He has purified the bureaucracy, purified the political arm, purified the IRGC, the military, etc. In doing so, in trying to install his cult of personality, to ensure that his ideology outlives him, to ensure that his elites are consolidated, he has given absolute priority and precedence to ideological commitment over technical expertise and experience, a bit like the IRGC model. What that's done is it's removed the final traces of meritocracy. And I want to emphasize the final traces of meritocracy, because the Islamic Republic was never a meritocracy. It has removed the final traces of meritocracy in the regime, and it has facilitated the rise of a cohort that's young, extremely ideological, incapable, and experienced. Internally, that has meant, it would make much more a rational actor would see the situation in Iran. As Saeid said, the structural factors that led to the Mahsa Amini protests have only got worse in the past 12 months. The Islamic Republic is probably closer than ever before to an external conflict. A rational individual would think that that's the moment to try and rally the people around the nation. In fact, this cohort, this ideological cohort, has used the opportunity to double down and launch a domestic Islamization program. Abroad, they have become much more ideological. They have struggled to read the rules of the international order and rightly respond. And we see that play out. They've become much more aggressive. They've been making much more strategic errors, and they're doubling down on their external project, despite their Achilles heel being the domestic scene. And we see that to lengths that we really couldn't foresee. Direct attack on Israel, more than 300 missiles, drones, etc., being fired at Israel, knowing that it would draw a retaliation. Many thought that that was suicidal, that was impossible. The Islamic Republic would never do that. This has been shaped by two factors. First, loss of US deterrence. But as I said, I believe more importantly, Khamenei has surrounded himself with these ideological yes men who lack experience, lack expertise, and ultimately this has shaped the Islamic Republic's calculus. They have become much more aggressive. Now, my fear is the combination of loss of deterrence and the rise of this new cohort, the dumbification of the regime, that produces a very, very toxic landscape. And there's lots of chatter within this elite that now, the next 9 months, because prior to a potential US administration taking office, the next 9 months may be the best time to weaponize. And this cohort are stupid enough, they are dumb enough to go for this. That's extremely concerning, because if this cohort that has demonstrated an appetite to strike Israel, knowing that they'd get hit back, this cohort have demonstrated just how stupid and dangerous they are. Imagine them having access to nuclear weapons. That would be awful. It's existential for the people of Iran, because it makes overthrowing this regime a lot harder. It's also an existential threat to the state of Israel and the Western interests overall. So yeah, the dumbification of the regime combined with a loss in US deterrence, that's why you're seeing external projection of power doubling down in that, even though domestically, really, the Achilles heel of the regime is its domestic scene, and the fact that the Iranian people, overwhelming majority of the Iranian people, want this regime gone.
Right. And all right, so back to that, because I think that's sort of a crucial point to start to wrap up on. Saeid, given that the Iranian regime is increasingly unpopular, and you can sort of see this in, as you talked about, in many, many different ways, and that it's alienated from its own population, what does it mean for the regime ideology, right? Because a rising tide lifts all boats, but a receding tide, right? It goes out, and are the ideological bonds that animate the Islamic Republic, are they getting weaker? Does the regime survive? Does the ideology survive at some point if there's major political change? I mean, how do you see this playing out?
In terms of the decline of ideology, you talk about it. Every political system, including authoritarian regime, usually rely on three pillars for survival: legitimacy, cooptation, and repression. The Islamic Republic has lost its legitimacy in the eyes of the Iranian people. Because of the dummification of a state, because of the mismanagement added to the international sanction, they are not really able to co-opt Iranian people or the elite. And most importantly, they are relying on the repression. So if you ask me right now, the Islamic Republic is more relied on the repression than any other pillar. This repression are keeping the Islamic Republic in a power, in a society that most of the people are alienated from the Islamic Republic. They are not following the Islamic ideology. They are not. But you have to remember, the Islamic Republic, as like other authoritarian regimes, is rely on the small but organized social base. In my optimistic opinion, in more than there are about 10 to 12% of the Iranian who are still supporting the Islamic Republic. Most of them, because of the benefit they are receiving, part of it because of the ideology. But the Islamic Republic are right now projecting this ideology in the region, trying to find the social basis outside of the countries. We are writing we have actually written an article on Islamization from outside, trying to bring all of these Afghan immigrants, all of these Muslims from other part of the world, that they believe to the ideology of Islamic Republic, replacing them with the Iranian middle class and Iranian who have become alienated to the system. So one scholar, Iranian scholar a few years ago said that the Islamic Republic used at the beginning, uses ideology to project the power. Right now, using the power to project the ideology. Right now you are using all of this repression inside and outside, trying to project ideology, mostly outside of the country because nobody really buy it inside of the country. But at the same time, you are moving to rely on the Shia militia in a state of the Iranian who are becoming less, attached to the Islamic Republic. And to summarize it, as long as the Islamic Republic has a desire and capacity to repress, and as long as the international environment, international community doesn't really care about the Iranian people, and the Iranian people are not united, the opposition of disunited, unfortunately, the Islamic Republic will survive and will continue to get involved in the region, repress Iranian people, and undermine international security.
So, Kasra, we have like 5 minutes left. So sort of the same question to you to round us out, but at least the first part is the same, right? Given those dynamics that Saeid talked about, given that the Iranian regime is increasingly unpopular at home and alienated from its population, what does this mean for the regime's external operations, for the priority of exporting the revolution that you talked about, which is embedded in the Iranian constitution and the founding documents? And what does it actually mean as a practical matter to sort of go back to the theme, the macro theme of this, for Iranian projection of power via its proxies, for the Iranian export of Islamic extremism?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there are various doctrines that Khamenei has published and has set out, and we can look at those as a framework as to what this means moving forward. As I said, the second phase of the Islamic Revolution, that's his single most important manifesto in recent years, and that gives you the trajectory of the Islamic Republic's kind of direction. But if we go back to the late 1990s, Khamenei outlined the 5 stages of the Islamic Revolution. He said, and has repeatedly said this, the Islamic Revolution is not complete. We do not have, quote, an Islamic government, nor do we have an Islamic society. The last time he said that firmly was in 2017, 2018. So despite the fact that this doctrine he laid out was in the late 1990s, this doctrine says there are 5 stages to the Islamic Revolution: an Islamic revolution, the creation of an Islamic regime, the creation of an Islamic government, the creation of an Islamic society, the creation of an Islamic civilization. And having achieved an Islamic civilization that dominates the world, that will facilitate the return of the hidden imam. Let's not forget, the entire legitimacy, at least the mandate for Khamenei to rule, is based on the fact that he is the Naib Imam, the 12th Imam's deputy. So if you look at this 5 stages of the revolution, Khamenei has said that Iran has only achieved 2 stages: an Islamic revolution, the creation of an Islamic regime. They have not yet created an Islamic government. The Raisi's de facto appointment in June 2021 was intended to create the Islamic government, to move on to creating an Islamic society, and then later Islamic civilization. Raisi is obviously dead now, and that's derailed the plans, only in terms of the conductor, though, because this plan is, as Khamenei has said, he has a rail gozari. There is a clear railway track that shows the destination. The conductor may have passed away, but Khamenei can find a replacement, and that track still goes on. So internally, they have a plan. The plan is to create this Islamic society. They've tried through various means. As Saeid said, Islamization from top, Islamization from bottom, grassroots Islamization, and now they're looking at Islamization from the outside to effectively change the demographic of Iran to create that state. Simultaneously, to create that Islamic civilization, this grand project, they are projecting power externally. They are doing this by, these aren't mercenaries that they are creating. These are organizations, militias that are created by the IRGC. IRGC manufactured militias, and the Tehran spends a significant amount of resource and time radicalizing these recruits, radicalizing their militants to make sure that they fully subscribe to the regime's ideals. And it should be noted, by the way, that at least Khamenei and others have alluded to, if the Iranian people will not support the Islamic Revolution, we will bring in the Fatimiyun, we will bring in Ansar Allah, the Houthis, who are dedicated to the revolution to preserve power. In other words, if it really reaches code red for them and they're about to collapse, don't be surprised if they start to bring in these Islamist militias to sustain power. Externally, as I said, the goal is part of this big doctrine, moving towards an Islamic civilization. That path will not be derailed, no matter what. And the reason actually they're becoming more ideological is because as part of this purification process, Khamenei has installed individuals who fully subscribe to this outlook. Saeid touched upon this, it's really important. The Islamic Republic doesn't really care about the Iranian people. It cares in so much as it can sustain power. Killing them, it doesn't care about them. Their livelihood, it doesn't care about them. What it has created, we often talk about the deep state that consists of the IRGC and the office of the supreme leader, but they've created a deep society, and Saeid has written about this extensively. They've created their own society, which has its working class, a middle class, and an upper class. And individuals within that very, very small constituency, that deep society, are the ones that the Islamic Republic supports financially, in terms of resources, in terms of providing them with employment opportunities, leading, enabling them to rise up, because it's that deep society that sustains the entire regime. They don't care about the Iranian people. They care about that deep society, and that deep society isn't Iranian. They view that deep society as being followers of the Imam and the Ummah. They are Islamists. They can consist of Afghan refugees who are loyal to Velayat al-Faqih. They can consist of Lebanese, Iraqi, even Americans who go and attest and their commitment to the regime. It's that deep society. They're very, very well organized, very, very well connected, and that's what's sustaining the regime. On the other side, you have a majority of people who oppose this regime, but they are unorganized, They are not connected, and that's the weakness. And so long as that kind of equilibrium exists, and the fact that the kind of outside powers aren't interested in supporting the Iranian people, this story will continue. It will become more bloody. And as I said, the IRGC will, the next leader will resort to more authority, the IRGC, to sustain his power. There'll be more bloodshed, in other words.
So not the most optimistic place to stop, but our time is expired. So gentlemen, thank you for this has been a tremendous conversation. I've certainly learned a lot. I hope all of the attendees have learned a lot as well. We'll have to put a pin in it now and say to be continued, because we've left a lot of food on the table to talk about the future scenarios, the future of the Iranian regime and its ideology. But for now, let me thank you guys for truly spectacular presentations. Let me thank everybody for attending. To close, just a couple of administrative notes. Again, we are recording this. This will be available after the fact if you want to rewatch it, if you want to forward it to your friends, and we encourage that you do. We will have this up on the AFPC website. We have it up on the AFPC YouTube channel. We will be posting about it on our social media platforms, on Facebook, on Twitter. I encourage all of you to follow Kasra and Saeid. Saeid, though, is very smart and he's not on Twitter, but you can follow him in other ways. But Kasra and I are stupid enough to be on Twitter, so you should follow us there and be part of the ongoing conversation. And again, to close, gentlemen, thank you. To look at their work, to follow what we're doing on Iran, please visit us at www.afpc.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Ilan. Thank you.